I am a perfectionist, and it is preventing me from fully living my life and expressing myself. Are you also too much in your head? Are you being too harsh on yourself unnecessarily? Do you feel like you're constantly stalling your life, delaying your projects because of the fear of making any mistakes? I discovered this book. It is titled Too Perfect: When Being in Control Gets Out of Control. And this book became one of the most profound reading experiences I've ever had in my life. This book also contains a test that helps you identify whether you are a perfectionist. When I was reading it, I recognized myself in so many chapters. It was kind of scary. Hey guys, my name is Paulina if this is your first time on my channel. And I think we should debunk the myth of perfectionism so we can all move on with our lives. So this book was written by Allan Mallinger and Jeannette Wyze. So the authors of this book call a perfectionistic person an obsessive, and I think it is a very fitting description. Perfectionism is truly an obsession. It is an inability to let go and move on from all these tiny details that have to be absolutely flawless. This makes me think about my experience at an architecture school. I would be unnecessarily reprinting drawings at like 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning, even if just one line width was off. Even if one line out of the thousands of lines in the drawing was not of the right width, I would spend an additional hour and a half just reprinting it on the plotter. And no one would ever know that that line was supposedly incorrect. I was just unable to let go. I felt that everything had to be absolutely flawless. So it just made me think about perfectionists spending their lifetimes chasing after all of these perfect details that no one will ever notice. And sometimes we end up overlooking the bigger picture. Another sad example I can think about is counting calories. I think in my early 20s, I suffered from some sort of an eating disorder because I was just so focused on my weight and on counting calories and on making sure that my diet was absolutely pristine, that I was completely obsessed with this entire topic, and it definitely dominated my entire life. I could never deviate from my eating regimen. I had to be absolutely perfect in everything I consumed. I think a lot of perfectionistic people suffer from eating disorders because it creates this illusion of control. It makes you think that you have complete power over this one area of your life. And that's why it's so easy to get sucked into it. Guys, my biggest issue with perfectionism is that we end up living our lives paralyzed. There is such a tremendous fear of criticism. There is such a disproportionate fear of mistakes. We're absolutely terrified of being judged. And a lot of perfectionists end up being emotionally guarded and afraid to share because facing potential judgment is the worst possible nightmare. But guess what? The harshest critic you will ever face is you yourself. Perfectionists are so harsh on themselves that no real-world experience can compare to that. It cannot compare to what's going on in the perfectionist's head. I also think that perfectionists face so much anxiety because they expect life to be perfect, but perfection is a myth. It does not exist. So we end up being so worried about every single outcome, about every single day. I truly think that if every person on this planet was a perfectionist, our civilization would just stall. We would spend too much time in our heads, and we would be too afraid to actually create something in the real world. Let's address the grand fear that stands behind the perfectionism. I think the reason we're so terrified of mistakes is because we think they will define us. On some subconscious or maybe even conscious level, we believe that our self-worth and our identity depends on how perfect we are. And that's why every single task, every single pursuit feels like a test. It feels like it will define how good we are, how worthy we are. I was discussing this with ChatGPT and it brought up this phrase, erasure of identity. And it just really resonated with what I think about perfectionism. We are just too afraid of losing our identity. And mistakes feel like a real jeopardy to that. We think that rejection or a mistake in one of the areas of life will equal to our general unworthiness. That's why every single step feels like it carries so much risk, because our entire identities are in jeopardy. I want to read a quote from this book to you. It says, "My worth depends on how good I am, how smart I am, and how well I perform." That's why we try to control the narrative so much. And that's the biggest fear that is behind perfectionism. Because of this grand fear, perfectionism leads to nonstop procrastination. When every single task, including even the mundane ones, carries so much pressure, we start to avoid them altogether. We start to want to hide from them because we just don't want to be tested every single day. The self-imposed pressure just becomes too much. It becomes unbearable. I procrastinated a lot today before writing the script and sitting down to film this. And I don't think perfectionists procrastinate because they're lazy. I think that they're really scared. They're really scared of putting their work out into the world for the fear of judgment. And I think they're silently suffocating from the pressure. So procrastination just helps you avoid this discomfort temporarily, but it's definitely not a long-lasting solution because, like I said, we end up living our lives paralyzed and we don't achieve our full potential. Another really upsetting part about perfectionism is that we can rarely enjoy our achievements. They don't bring us joy. They don't validate us. We might experience temporary satisfaction from achieving something, but then we instantly discard it. We instantly discredit it. And we set our mind on the next goal. And we end up living our lives in this rat race, chasing after all of these achievements and never feeling validated by them. You know, once you climb a tall mountain, there's always the next taller mountain. So ultimately, this mindset doesn't work. And it's taking me a lot of effort to rewire my brain. It is honestly the biggest revelation I had this last year. The revelation that the rat race never ends unless we end it. I want to read you another quote from this book on the topic of achievement. It says, "The perfectionist, on the other hand, is apt to experience any given task or interaction as a test that will reflect his adequacy. So it's always important for him to do things correctly, know the answer, make the right decision. His goal and motives in any endeavor are so complicated that he can hardly avoid being preoccupied and tense. When he does achieve excellence, he can rarely enjoy it." And this last sentence is so true. Okay, let's move on to the positive part of this video. I think identifying the problem and admitting it to yourself is half the battle. But I also want to share 2 techniques from this book that I think are groundbreaking for perfectionists. The first technique that the authors are sharing in this book is to aim to be average. Aim for average in whatever you're doing. Think about what a B- student would have accomplished in a certain task, and just aim for that. Perfectionists tend to aim for the best work possible, right? For something to be completely flawless. But when you tell yourself, I'm just going to aim for the average, it instantly decreases the level of pressure that you're putting yourself under. It instantly allows you to do a lousier job, but actually the quality is not going to suffer that much. The authors say that your losses will not come even close to your gains. Because when you aim for average, you're able to move on with your life. You're able to accomplish your tasks because you're no longer under the pressure of being perfect. And I think something being done well is better than something not being done but perfect. So now I'm telling myself, aim for the average, aim for the average. I don't have to do a perfect job. I can be applying for jobs and my job application can be average. It doesn't have to be perfect. And because of your self-drive, you will still do a really good job, but it will get stuff done without the pressure. Another technique from this book is very hands-on, and it is about structuring your work or study blocks in a very disciplined manner. I think perfectionists sometimes are under the spell that the time is infinite and we can just spend all the time in the world obsessing over details without actually getting stuff done. So with this technique, you are creating a study block of like 2 hours and you're not getting distracted and you're moving forward with the task. And once the 2 hours are done, then you can relax and do something else. But during those 2 hours, you're not doing anything but that task. I followed these instructions to the T multiple times, and I was actually very productive and was very happy with myself. I think that getting stuff done definitely helps you get out of your head. It helps you realize that the world is not as scary as you might think. So I think taking this kind of action is definitely helpful with overcoming perfectionism. So in the end, I just want to say that this is the time to live our lives. This is the time to create. This is the time to make mistakes and grow from them. This is the time to not be afraid, no matter what it is. This is the time to be a dreamer and to be a doer. In the end, I'm going to leave you with one more paragraph from this book. It says, "They struggle daily under the weight of a massive inner rulebook, an overgrown sense of duty, responsibility, and fairness. Most obsessives rarely taste the joys of the moment. The present hardly exists for them. Even in their time off, many can't fully relax or just play. Indeed, they never are really off. Worries bedevil them as they plow through life doing the right things, hoping that caution, diligence, and sacrifice will pay off someday. But we don't want someday. We want today. We want to live in the present." So that's why if you recognized yourself in this video, I highly recommend reading this book. And I just hope that this video cheered you up and maybe gave you some insight into perfectionism. I will see you in my next video, guys. Thank you for watching. Bye.